All right. Let me send out the notification. Sweet. Okay. Let me quick pull up the document that I have been messing around with. What is going on? Okay. Sure. What's this thing? Okay. All right. Excuse me. So, where we left off. Let me get this over here. There we go. Where we left off was we had this flashbang warning. Is there actually a way? Give me a second. Is there a way to like get dark mode on here? Doesn't seem like it. I'm not seeing a way to do it. Okay, that's unfortunate. We're just gonna have to deal with the fact that it's bright. Yo, what's up, CDOM? What? We back? F this shit and quack. Welcome. Oh, what an entrance. Okay. So, can I move this? I can. Ooh, there we go. And the arrow didn't follow. Okay, great. Thank you, Google. You are lovely. So glad to have you. Okay, so last time we implemented basically everything except for the value provider, which is going to take a bit of work, but I do want to eventually get to this bit. So let's do that. That's right. So the last thing we did last time is we made a 4-dimensional array of nullable entities, which we will come back to. One thing that I do want to change, I think, is it in component here? Yeah, so this receive value change request event. We are actually going to return an array of modifiers here. And the reason that we want to do that is because, actually, maybe not an array, maybe just like an IEnumerable. We can mess around with this later, but some kind of collection of value change request modifiers. And I want to do that because we could potentially have a bunch of nested stuff, and we would want to return all of the modifiers. So get value change request modifier comes from, it's passed in as a parameter. So I guess I can just say this should return an IEnumerable of modifiers. No? Is that not? Oh, I see. I also have to do it here. Okay. There we go. I am going to zoom out. If it is completely unreadable, please let me know, because I need to see more of the code on screen. Maybe I should be wrapping lines, and that would make it easier, but we're just going to deal with this for now. Okay, so we return a bunch of them. And then, does entity have anything to do with that? No. Okay. So, what I want to do here, well, I should probably explain that the main idea behind the value provider is that it's meant to be like an easy way to change a value and have that change notify the entire dungeon. So every entity within the dungeon can be notified whenever any value changes. So a component is going to be like the main. Yeah, and actually I can, honestly, I think I should probably just get rid of these things and just have a value provider be part of a component. I think it's probably the best way to do this. No, don't do that. Don't do that. Google, stop it. So, value provider is basically state. So an effect is like what the thing is doing, and a value provider is supposed to be information that the component holds. So, for example, a health component would probably need either an integer or a float or something like that to hold the actual health value. And then if you ever wanted to change that health value, you would just do it through the value provider, and then the value provider would automatically send that change throughout the dungeon, right? And so kind of the way that I want to do this, because a dungeon can have a bunch of different entities, and entities can have a bunch of different components, etc. What I'm going to have to do is if a value change request is made, I don't remember saying that. If a value change request is made, I'm going to have to send that event all the way up the tree to the dungeon, and then the dungeon's going to have to send it to every entity that it has, and every entity is going to have to send it to every component it has. So that's the idea. Which means, so I already have the component set up to receive both types of event. So we've got a value changed, which means the value has already changed. And then we've got receive value change request. So this is before the value has actually changed. Yo, Davy's Artificial Sun, how's it going? Mr. 4D. Yeah, our four-dimensional array of entities. Yeah. It's still there. We'll get to that in a bit, but what was I just doing? I was looking at the component. What are you using for the game, though? Don't know. We'll figure that out. But we need this stuff first. I can't just go throwing assets into a game engine without actually having the groundwork. Currently dying trying to figure out how to add a stupid tag to an item. It shouldn't be this hard to figure out. What are you doing trying to add a tag to an item. As a game engine, you making your own or Unity? I probably will not be making my own game engine because that seems like a bit of a task, and I'm not a huge fan of doing my own rendering code. So what I might end up doing is either just finding a rendering library that's super easy to use, or I don't know, I can probably just do a game engine or use a game engine. But this is all in C#, so if I do decide to move over to a game engine, then I can, you know, just copy and paste a bunch of this stuff and it'll just work. What's up? How's it going, Cortax? Making fishing stuff for a friend. That's pretty cool. What kind of fishing stuff? Right, okay, so the idea, as I just explained, is that the value provider provides a value that if you ever want to change that value, it needs to send the event all the way up to the dungeon so that the dungeon can send it to all of its entities and all the entities can send it to all of its components, etc. So the component is already set up to receive both types of events, both before the value has actually changed and after the value has changed. Now I need to set up the entity to do basically the same thing. So I'm going to do this. And I wonder if we should actually say that a component is only allowed to... is only allowed to send one change request modifier. We'll leave it as multiple. We'll leave it as multiple. And I also just had a thought that maybe I should change some of this stuff. Or I guess update it. Custom fish mainly, randomized weights, fishing leaderboards, custom rods, etc., etc. Yo, that sounds pretty cool. Value provider provides a value. It does. We need that quote. You are a VIP, so you can add it yourself if you wanted to. It's just exclamation point, add quote, and then whatever text you want there. I took 2 finals today and then have been playing Factorial for a few hours ever since. I am now lightheaded and my brain doesn't function properly. Why would you play a game like Factorio after taking 2 finals? That almost sounds intentional. It works, although it is going to wrap... Yeah, it's going to wrap all of that into a quote already. I hunger for industry. Oh no. I mean, that's on you then. That's on you. Not that that's a bad thing. You know, if you want to fry your brain, you are absolutely allowed to do that. It already adds that? Yeah. That's just a convenient thing here. What is it? 130. Value provider provides a value. There we go. Now it should work. Okay, so the thought that I just had is that maybe whenever I like pass in a function as a thing here, I should also okay, I should also pass in like the thing that's using the function. Push toy. How's it going? My dudes. I am trying to put together the groundwork for what you call it, a dungeon crawler roguelike. Okay, so we're calling it, and then we just pass this in. Okay, and then I kind of want to do that with everything here. That bit is fine. Just everywhere where we're passing in like a function like this, I would also want to give it the effect itself. That way it has access to that. Wait, does an action work like that? Yeah, okay, that's fine. So then I can just go this. Just in case somebody wants access to the thing that's actually calling the function. Whoops. That works. What does that involve? Lots of structure. Indeed. Indeed. I have this document from a couple streams ago that is like just a bunch of ramblings on a sheet of paper. And then I put together this, which is kind of the composition hierarchy that I want. It's gone through a couple of different versions, but basically we have a dungeon that contains a bunch of entities which can have components attached to them, and the components can have effects, which are further broken down. They can have state, which I'm for now calling a value provider, and then why did I have this here? Value change request modifier. That's not actually how that works. This was left over from a previous thing. I think I can get rid of that, actually. Probably. I think that makes sense. So yeah, then an effect is broken down between like a trigger, so like the thing that actually activates the effect, the effect target. So we need some way of like getting the target, for example, a random enemy or another creature within 2 tiles, because this is all grid based. A condition, so like, you know, if your health is less than 20 or something like that, you know, any additional conditions, and then the actual thing that happens. And then you can have compound conditions as well, which is like this sort of recursive thing where you can put together, where is it here? So like you can like put together a bunch of simple conditions, joining them with an and or an or you can actually put together complex conditions as well. But yeah, a lot of structure here. Not a whole lot of interesting stuff, I would say, but necessary for what we're trying to do. Yeah, so I just edited that. Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, I just copy and pasted that stuff. I'll get to that in a second. What I want to do is add this as a parameter. We can go like that. Okay, there we go. These ability systems can be complicated. Yes. This is probably like the fourth or fifth time I have tried to make something like this from scratch. And like, granted, what I've got going on here is like a combination of a bunch of different things that I've tried. So I think that this is like, I've got a feeling this is going to lead somewhere, but I'm kind of just hoping at this point. Because through all of my attempts, I have gotten stuck at some point, and so far I have not gotten to that point, but I'm sure eventually it'll happen. Okay, so we want to receive the value changed event. That does not exist. Okay, yeah, that's fine, because we actually want to write our own function here. I've been working on mine for many years casually. It can take time, for sure, yeah. What are you working on? What kind of stuff are you doing? Yeah, so this is when the value is already changed. So we can just loop over all the components here. And what? Components. Autofill. Could you be smart, please? Component.receive value changed event. This is not the version that, yeah, okay. That should be it. And then for this one, I'm actually trying to think, maybe I want to redo how like this stuff is initialized. Let me finish editing this function first, and then I'll do that. So I would like to make value change request modifiers. Make a new list here. Value change request modifier. Whoop. Hello. There we go. And then we'll again loop through each component. And we'll say, see value change request event. So we'll grab, oh wait, is it add range? Does this add like a collection to the current collection? Adds the elements of the specified collection to the end of the list. Okay. Perfect. So then I guess I just pass the event into here. That should work. And then we can return the modifiers. So basically we make an empty list. We loop through all the components. We have the component receive this event and retrieve the modifiers from it and add it to our list. And then we return this list. So then whatever calls this function can get just a giant list of modifications. Did I call it? I did call it modifier and not modification. Okay. That's fine. Video James isn't real anymore. The devs patched them out. Poor Video James. They didn't ask to do that. They are a victim. Stonebot, could you try picking a quote that doesn't paint me in a negative light? That would be phenomenal. If you could. Pretty please. Let me go back to the component. Been working on some Diablo 2 inspired stuff. Nice. I have not played any of the Diablos. Is that... I need to Google it to remind myself what it is. Diablo. They're up to 4? Okay, image search is just giving me a bunch of nonsense. This is very unhelpful. I wanted to get a sense of what the video game is about. All I see is this giant demon person. I mean, they look like they look like a giant. I don't know if they're actually large. Okay, very unhelpful. Thanks, Stonebot. Stonebot has a unique sense of humor, I would say. What was the thing that I wanted to do? I wanted to add, instead of passing components in as a parameter, I wanted to add like a function to explicitly add components, but I don't know why I wanted to do that. That was the thought that I had earlier, but I don't remember why I wanted to do that. Oh, right. It's like I want stuff to be accessible from lower in the tree. So like, for example, an entity has a bunch of components. So if a component is doing something, I would like it to know what entity has it. Right? So if for whatever reason here I wanted to add some code that's like, you know, do something with the entity that has this, I wouldn't be able to do that because you can go down the tree, right? You can go like from an entity, you can grab the list of components and go down, but you can't go back up, right? So like what I could do is just have a thing, entity, call it like owner or something like that. And then, you know, I don't know how to deal with that though. Like, I don't know if I should just, if I should like pass it in as a parameter here. I feel like it would make sense to pass it in as a parameter. And then instead of having like a primary constructor like this, I could just have an explicit constructor that when it passes in the entity owner, it could like go to the entity and add the component. So like, if I'm executing code in, say, like an action, it has access to the effect, but the effect doesn't have access to a component, so it wouldn't be able to like work its way up the tree. I played Diablo 3 with some neighbors back before I knew I needed glasses, so I could only identify things by whether or not they moved and their general color. Yeah, for a long time I tried to hold off on getting glasses because I didn't feel like I needed them, and then when I got them I was like, oh, this is what normal people can see. Like, it was world altering. You could just put primary constructors on classes now. I didn't even notice. Yeah, I don't remember when that ability came out, but yeah, so like in the class, I don't know what this is called, declaration maybe, you could just throw some parentheses in there and this is a primary constructor, and then this, like, I don't exactly know how it works, but like this parameter then can be used like anywhere, which is kind of weird to me. Like if I wanted to access it here, I could do that. Lowercase c. Like in this works. Now it gives me an issue here. It's captured into the state of enclosing type and its values. Okay, so maybe I can't actually do that. I thought I could. But yeah, it's a little bit strange. I remember the time when I was driven home from the place where I got glasses. I was in awe of just how well I could see the leaves on each tree, right? Dude, it's like going from vaguely recognizing a person's outline to actually being able to see their eyes, you know, when they're just like 10 feet away or something like that. It was mind-blowing. It was like, wait, I can actually like identify people now. I know who that is. I remember going downtown and seeing people's faces 100 meters away, and it was intimidating. Right? Because, like, I felt like I was somewhat isolated, because, like, I just assumed that everybody else could see the same thing that I saw. So I figured if I was far away enough, they couldn't tell who I was, or, like, they wouldn't be able to get a good idea as to what I'm up to. But of course all of that changed, and then it's like, oh, everybody can see exactly what I'm doing, like, somewhat regardless of distance. Or at least at a much greater distance. That's kind of uncomfortable. So I just assumed I had somewhat a bit of privacy, but I didn't. How do I want to do this? Like, so there are a couple of ways of approaching this, right? So I'm in the component class. A component is owned by an entity. What I could do is just say, okay, you are allowed to construct a component, and it might not have an owner. And it is your responsibility to, after you construct the component, to then add an owner. Or like assign it an owner. I'm not a huge fan of that idea. The other way that you could do this is you could say, okay, you need to pass in the owner as a parameter to the constructor, in which case you would have to construct the entity first, and then you could construct the components. Which is like fine, because the other way that you would have done it is you would construct the components first and then pass it in as an enumerable to the entity that you want to create. So it's kind of like you have to create everything in the opposite order, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But then what I can't do is I can't pass in a list of components here. I mean, I could in theory, but like, where's the control shift? Yeah, that. So like, I wouldn't be able to pass in this list of components because a component has to have an entity in the first place to even be constructed. The world seems somehow more private when you are blind. I know. Like, sometimes when I'm like upset or have like very strong emotions, that's what is going on. Why is my stream preview loading? Has my stream died? It says I'm fine. Okay, I appear to be back. Sorry about that. Like I was saying, sometimes when I get like extremely upset, I'll just take off my glasses and it helps significantly. Because then it's like, if I can't process the world around me, then things get a lot easier to deal with. Like the render distance grew 10x, exactly, yeah. Everything becomes in focus, not just the stuff right here. So, back to the point. So I can either have the owner be nullable, in which case, you know, you're allowed to create a component, but you have to, at some point, assign it an owner, which puts more responsibility on the person creating the entity. Or you can say, all right, you have to create an entity first, and then you can create a component that belongs to the entity. I don't... Should I or should I not allow a component to exist without being attached to an entity? Seems more correct to create the entity first. I agree. I just want to make sure. The mind is not fit to comprehend these things. Talking about both topics. You're not wrong. You're not wrong. It's like if I do it this way, then I'm basically saying you're not allowed to create a component that's not immediately attached to an entity. Which I can't immediately think of a reason why that's not good. I'm just concerned. Maybe it's fine though. It just crashes. Thank you, Studbot. But I think we should do something like this. And then for the effects, we can't actually like... I don't know, how do I... Mark field is required. It should be nullable. I mean, something like this, I guess. It just needs to be an empty container. And then you can add stuff to it later. And then I kind of need to do this like all the way down, basically. So an effect has all these functions, and because I'm passing in the effect as a parameter to these functions, it's okay. The condition, however, does need a, what did I call it? An effect as the owner. Effect owner. Do I care about that stuff? I can just do that, okay. Because this is an abstract class, not an interface. Interfaces sometimes get annoying. I think this is correct, though. So then an effect, take me back here. So then we can't pass this in as a parameter because we would have to, the effect has to exist first. I prefer interfaces. They're easier to think about for me. Yeah. I think in this case, it would get annoying with like having state in it. Because like the way that you would have to do this as an interface is that like, I don't think you can have a constructor, right? What in the world does that mean? Unexpected parameter list, yeah. So like you can't have a constructor, yeah, and you would have to be like, okay, so this thing has something called an owner, but you can't actually assign it a value. Adds, oh my bad. I mean, I like, guess this would have to be like nullable, right? So that it can initially be null, and then you can just say if condition is not null. No, we should say if condition, I'll do equals. If condition is null or the condition is not met, then we return and we don't actually apply the action here. I think that works. So then you can create a condition outside of having to pass it in as a parameter, and then you can just assign it. Anyway, what I was saying about the interface is that, like, interfaces, I feel like in concept, they're very helpful, very effective. But like in this context, because I don't have to, but I want this condition object to have state. Like if this was an interface, then it would have to be like, okay, so this object has state, but it's not defined yet. You actually have to give it a value when you extend the interface, instead of like here where I can just have that functionality already in there. Yeah, so I'm gonna have to do a not primary constructor here. Wait, what's my... There it is. I'm trying to get more used to using the keyboard to navigate around, because sometimes it's annoying to use my mouse. Equals owner, and then we can say owner dot condition is this. I can probably use the capital O here. Something like this, right? So we have to give it an owner, and as soon as we do, it automatically gets assigned as the effects condition. So like we are allowed to construct this without a condition, and we have to add one later. Or we don't have to, I guess, because we're checking for null here. So then I want to do the same thing for everything up the tree. So an effect needs a component. Owner. Oh, that should be lowercase. Owner. I can have this component owner, and like you can mess around with stuff that's you can mess around with access. Like, you know, technically I don't want this to be public because I don't really want it to change all the time. But then also, okay, how is the condition going to like actually update this stuff if it's not public? I don't know, it gets kind of weird. I think for now I'll just leave everything public, and then can worry about if that has adverse effects later. Oops, I want to put that here. Get rid of that. Give me public. And it's basically this, except without all this garbage out front, right? Something like this. We could say owner equals owner, and then, I don't know, down here, let's say owner dot effects. Can we not add to just an IEnumerable? Might have to make it a list, which is fine. Or we might be able to make it a collection. I don't remember what the right thing to do here is. Let me Google it. C# IEnumerable versus iCollection. Usually you choose what will depend on which methods you need access to. In general, IEnumerable for a list of objects that only needs to be iterated through, iCollection for a list of objects that need to be iterated through and modified. Okay, so I should use an iCollection. Gotcha. Okay, so this component, instead of IEnumerable here, this should be iCollection. And then, yeah, these being IEnumerables, excuse me, are actually okay. Those can stay enumerables because they don't need to be modified. I forgot where I was. Right, okay. So now we should be able to say .add. Yeah. Oops. This. Okay. So we initialize everything and then we add it. That should be good. And then we can go back up to component and we have something similar already. Although again, I want to make this into a regular constructor. Component. Oh, this should be public. Okay. And then let's go owner equals owner. This thing equals the function that gets passed in. And then we can say owner dot components dot add this, and we need to make that what the heck? Oh, sorry, got a notification from Twitch. And then we need to make this a collection. Okay. So that should fix that. And then let's go up to entity. So an entity. Let's do a similar thing here. Entity. So an entity is actually going to need a little bit more than just an owner. It's actually going to need an owner and a location within the dungeon. So it's going to need like a dungeon as the owner, right? Public dungeon owner. This is just going to be an empty thing. That's not what I wanted you to do. I can say, yeah, so I'm gonna need a location. So I'm gonna need a floor, an X, a Z, because this is gonna be a flat two-dimensional thing. So I'm gonna use Z instead of Y. And if somebody gets mad at me for that, you're valid. But I'm going to use it anyway. And then I need a layer. And what I'm probably going to do... I wonder if it's okay to keep all these values separate. Because I was thinking of like creating a struct. Thinking of doing something like this. entity location, and then having like a public int floor, you know, public int x, etc. Why did it do that? Okay. You know, etc. And then instead of like storing all these values individually, I just store an entity location. But I think maybe this is okay. If I run into like a valid reason to store everything all together, we can do that. But I think for now, we'll just keep it all separate. So, facts, okay. Yeah, I just want to think of like what order I want to do all this stuff in. I think this is fine. Floor, public int x, public int z, whoop. Public int layer. These are 4 dimensions. And then hopefully autocomplete can help me out here. Perfect. I can say owner dot entities. And now is where we're going to utilize that 4-dimensional array. Oops. Gonna go, it was this order, right? It was floor xz layer, floor with depth and layer. Yeah, okay. So floor xz layer. Perfect. Cool. So that's that to do done. We are storing the location now. Maybe I want to do this differently. Yeah. I think this is okay for now. It's probably fine. Okay. Sorry, just thinking into the future. Okay, so now the flow is we create the dungeon first, and then when we create an entity, we can specify where to put it. Obviously, this has the problem that we could create multiple entities and specify that it should be at the same location. And so one would like override the other one, but technically their owners would still, you know, like they'd be stored in the 4-dimensional array. Or they would not be stored in the 4-dimensional array, but all of this other information would indicate that they're supposed to be there. So that would technically be like an invalid state, right? So I'm wondering if we add a check here that says if there's something in that location I don't know, throw something. That way we can guarantee that we're not like overriding anything. Feel like that makes sense. I don't mean, like, all of this stuff is public anyway, so like technically you could force an invalid state. But again, I'm gonna deal with that later. And then the dungeon is fine, right? Like, the dungeon doesn't have an owner or anything, it just creates the 4-dimensional array and then it's fine. Okay. And then, yeah, I don't know if this should be like a custom exception or if I can just edit the exception message. Not really sure what the best way to do that is. But I think everything else works fine. So like this has an owner. So like then what you would do is you would create the dungeon, you would create an entity that gets put in the dungeon, and then you could create a component which automatically gets added to that entity, and then create effects which get added to that component. And then you can add conditions that get added to the effect. Or I guess just a single condition. So then the other thing, because we're checking for a potential invalid state here, we should also do it here. Right, because an effect can only have a single condition. So if the condition is already assigned, we don't want to overwrite it. So I want to check to see if owner.condition is not null. Then I want to throw. I feel like that makes sense. Okay, and then condition, complex condition. Yeah, so this all changed. This requires a list of other conditions. I think that makes sense still. But we do need... We do need the effect owner. And then we can pass that into the base class. There we go. Okay. Before I go, because EP, my keys are wet. Alright. Get some rest, Glitch. Thanks for being here. I appreciate you. I'm going to have to do the same thing with the simple condition, where I pass in an effect. I just realized this doesn't really work in the same way. For the conditions, because they're like, just because of the way the conditions work. So complex. So like a simple condition can either be owned by an effect, or it could be owned by a complex condition. Same thing with a complex condition. It could either be owned by an effect or a complex condition. How do I deal with that? Ouch. So I guess maybe what we could do is we could make another constructor here where we're given a complex condition and we say instead of directly assigning the owner to that, we'll assign it to the complex conditions owner. But then we kind of lose the structure, right? We're like bypassing how a complex condition is laid out. Maybe this whole inheritance shenanigans that I'm doing is not a good idea. So like I've got the base class of condition. I've got simple conditions, which is just basically you can give it a function to test to see whether or not the condition is met, and then a complex condition, which has a list of other conditions, which are then joined by either and or. So because of this list, a condition can either be owned by an effect directly or by a complex condition. Because like I want the ability I want the ability for complex conditions to own other complex conditions. Is basically what I'm going for there. And I feel like this is the most obvious way to do it, but then we run into the issue where this owner could either be an effect or a complex condition, and those are like two dramatically different objects. I feel like the bad way of doing this is to just say some object owns this condition, and if that happens to be an effect, then so be it. But it could also be a complex condition. Yo, what's up, Edme? Thank you for the hydrate. How's it going? Doing well. It's my birthday. Yo, happy birthday. I'm not doing too bad. I feel like today was somewhat productive for me. You doing anything special for your birthday? I finished up some stuff at work, which feels great. Went to the grocery store. I need to take another trip to the grocery store because I didn't get everything that I wanted. But I felt productive. And now I am struggling through the groundwork of a video game. So I don't know how I want to do this. You know, if you make a list, you don't forget things at the grocery store. I didn't forget things, I just didn't have the capacity to take them home. I only have so much arm space. Might go out for dinner later? Nice. I keep being tempted to, like, order takeout. Because, like, there are restaurants somewhat close to me. But I'm not, like, super excited to make the trek. Should I get you a wagon for Christmas? I mean, you can. I may or may not actually use it. I've been using a backpack, which usually allows me to get most things that I need. It's just that I kind of waited a little bit too long to go shopping this time. So there was some stuff that I wanted that I couldn't get, but normally it's fine. Normally I get everything that I need. So do I just, like, what I could do is just say that every effect has to have a complex condition. And then you're allowed to add as many simple conditions onto that as you want. No, because then a complex condition still could either be owned by an effect or a different complex condition. I mean, I kind of feel like I just have to make the owner a generalized object instead of something concrete. Like, that would make that to me, that would be the most obvious, but I don't like it. You should do grocery runs Death Stranding style with, like, a 10-meter tall backpack. That would help, yeah, I think. If I had, like, a modular backpack where I could just stack things up 10 meters high, yeah, that'd be great. I could take an entire aisle home with me. Like, I don't know, maybe this just has to be an object. I don't really see any other way of doing it, you know? This is, this is not easy. No, not component condition. So then I would say, what, like, owner dot conditions dot add this. Then I would have to make this not an enumerable, or I would actually have to remove this entirely. Make that an empty thing and then say collection. Similar to what I've been doing with all this other stuff. What? Oh, okay. It was giving me a red line, and I was like, why? Why do? Hello? No, but it takes like 15 to 20 minutes to walk to like the nearest restaurant, which is like doable, but it's just such a pain, especially when like the sidewalks near my place are all slanted and I don't know, like they're not the worst sidewalks I've ever seen, but they're not great. There's also a road that doesn't have a crosswalk in like a convenient place. Right. I would like to go out. Maybe I could do that for my birthday. Is met. So then, like, I would have to do a very similar thing, right? Like, I would have to have two constructors. Complex condition. Could I actually make a private? This is fine. I think what I should do is make a private constructor here. Is that a good idea? Hang on, maybe not. So we can have either an effect be the owner or this thing. No, not or this thing, just this thing. Could say extends condition owner. Get rid of all this stuff. What am I missing? Must declare a body? It does. Am I missing something? Join. What is it doing? Did I... Whoops. Oh, because I'm not actually extending condition anymore. And then this should be base, not the word condition. Ugh. Okay. Let's make another one here that instead of taking an effect, it takes a complex condition. Okay. We can do a very similar thing in the simple condition. I did not mean to hit that button. Okay, simple conditions. Put these over here. Let's grab this guy, throw it into the constructor. Then I can get rid of all of this. And then say is met func equals is met. Whoops, don't do that, please. Stop scrolling me. Is met func is met. Okay. So now it should have an owner, which unfortunately is just going to have to be a general object. It's kind of frustrating. Not a huge fan, but I think it just has to be the way that it is. I don't really feel like there's a way around that. I'm going to be honest. So if I were to... What happens if I do this? No, it gets mad. Why does it get mad? It says it succeeded. Oh, right. It's a class library. Okay. So the idea is you create a dungeon and then you create an entity. And as a parameter in the constructor, you have to give it the dungeon that you just created. You can also, or you also have to give it a location. It will then check to see that nothing else is in that location and then update everything. It'll construct the object and then add itself to the dungeon. Then you can create a component. And in order to create a component, you have to give it the entity that you just created, as well as a function. Get value change request modifier. Does that part make sense? I don't think it does, because component is kind of the thing that we're wanting to say is like... So like, the whole point of making an entity is so that you can attach a bunch of components to it, and the components are going to be basically their own classes. So I think it makes sense to make this abstract. Oops. Not abstract-y, just straight up abstract. And then instead of passing this in as a function, we can just have it be... It's this thing. Yeah, it'll just be an abstract function, right? Abstract, we need to return this. And then we can call it this. And as parameters... Well, now that it's an abstract function, it already has access to this. Value change request event. So then I can just get rid of that thing. And I don't need to pass it in. Clean this up a little bit. Get rid of that guy. I think that makes sense. Because you're gonna have to extend component in order to like actually do anything, right? I mean, I guess technically not. Because it's all kind of like Legos, right? You can just plug in and whatever. So maybe I shouldn't do this. Okay, I can get rid of this though. I don't need that comment anymore. I think that's fine. Right, and then you create an effect. In order to create an effect, you give it the component that you just created along with all of these functions. This is maybe a little bit weird. The workflow. I don't know. I don't think workflow is the right word, but the flow. The flow is a bit weird. Maybe that's okay though. Maybe that's okay. So I think I did all of that stuff. So this is going to be so here's kind of my problem is that I don't know that storing all of this stuff in the entity itself makes sense. Does it? I guess here's a good question. Should an entity have to be located in a dungeon in order to be quote-unquote part of that dungeon? Because what if you wanted like an entity that's just there to manage something? Then you don't necessarily want it to be like in the dungeon, you just want it to be a part of the dungeon. So I feel like it's almost like we shouldn't even worry about the location, right? Could just do this and then have a component worry about the actual location, right? We could have like a position component that we can slap onto an entity, and then that component can take care of everything related to getting added to the dungeon and stuff like that. Just trying to think if that even makes sense. Like, I feel like it's okay. But if it doesn't have a location, how is the dungeon going to know to send it events? Like, it has to be part of some data structure. Like, what I could do is just say that there's some there's some collection of entities, right? So instead of specifically it being a four-dimensional grid, or four-dimensional array, I guess, it could just be some generic collection of entities. The only problem is, if you want to, say, retrieve an entity at a particular location, you would have to loop through every entity and find the one that has the location that matches what you're looking for. I don't know that I like that. So one of the issues here, not here, just like in general with this kind of a video game, is that the order that things proc can change the next game state. So for example, let's say that I have a shield. Let's say the player has a shield, and that shield says that if the incoming damage is 5 or less, just don't take any damage. In other words, reduce the incoming damage to 0. And then you also have a piece of armor that says if you're taking incoming, if there is incoming damage, cut it in half. So if you have both of those items and some enemy does an attack that deals 10 damage, if the shield procs first, it's going to see that the incoming damage is 10 and it's not going to do anything. And then the armor is going to reduce it to 5. It's going to cut it in half, reduce it to 5. And then the player's going to take 5 damage. If the armor procs first, it's going to cut it in half, reduce it to 5. And then the shield looks at the incoming damage, sees that it's 5, and then reduces it to 0. So if the shield procs first, the player takes 5 damage. If the armor procs first, the player takes 0 damage. Now, that can be worked around by doing something what I'm doing, where instead of directly changing the amount of incoming damage, we're instead returning this value change request modifier. And then when we actually go to change the player's health, we would like aggregate all of these modifiers and then resolve them in some way, in some deterministic way, right? So it wouldn't be a matter of which item procs first. It would be a matter of how does the resolver take this giant collection of modifications and resolve it. Which is a lot more like deterministic and not it's more deterministic and transparent as to how it operates. The problem here, if I have just a collection of entities, is, let's say I want to move an entity to, or let's say I want to swap the location of two entities, right? Which in Pokemon Mystery Dungeon is a very common thing. Like, if you try and move onto the tile that another creature is already standing on, you'll swap positions. So let's say I want to do that. So before we actually send out the event that says, hey, these two things, or like, hey, this thing's position changed, right? Because in theory, we would have a value provider for the position of the first entity, and then a value provider for the position of the second entity. We would have to make it so that the value change events don't get sent out until they have actually completely swapped places. Because otherwise you could say, okay, well, entity 2 is in this location and entity 1 is trying to get to that location. So obviously we have to set its location to the same as the second one. And if we send out the events at that point, then the dungeon is in kind of an invalid state where there are two entities occupying the exact same location. So what we would have to do is we would have to change the location of entity 1, change the location of entity 2, and then send out the events, send out both events. The problem is, again, the order in which those events get sent out. So let's say that entity 1 is holding an item that says every time you move upwards, take 1 damage. And then entity 2 says every time you move downwards, heal every entity within a 1-tile radius by 1. Now, if entity 1 is below entity 2, and they swap places, the order in which the events get sent out is going to change the state, or is going to change the next game state. Because if the event that says, hey, entity 1's location has changed, if that gets sent out first, then entity 1 is going to take 1 damage because that's the item that they're holding. And then entity 2's event is going to get sent out that says, hey, entity 2 just changed locations. In which case, the item is going to heal everything within a 1-tile radius, which is going to heal entity 1. So if entity 1 has full health, and its location change event gets sent out first, it will take 1 damage and then immediately get healed by entity 2. And in the next game, so in the previous game state, it will be at full health. And in the next game state, it will still be at full health because it took 1 damage and healed 1 damage. If entity 2's location change event gets sent out before entity 1's, then what happens is the healing item procs first, which, because entity 1 is already at full health, nothing changes. And then entity 1's location change event gets sent out, which causes it to take 1 damage. So you've got one instance where if entity 1's location change event gets sent out first, then it will be at full health once everything gets resolved. And in the other game, in the other scenario, entity 2's location change event gets sent out first. In which case, entity 1 has 1 less health instead of full health. So once again, we run into a scenario where the order of things changes the outcome of all of the events. Or like it changes the next game state depending on which event gets sent out first. So is it possible to do a similar thing where we have some kind of resolver that takes in a bunch of events that need to be sent out, and it determines which event to send out. It determines the order in which the events should get sent out. Because unlike the modifiers could all be calculated, could like all be taken into account at the same time, but the events must be sent out in some order. Now, if we just have a collection of entities like this, then entities that are added to this collection first will receive events first. Is that a problem? Because technically that's still deterministic. It's just not transparent to the player. If there are two items that seemingly affect the same thing, the player should be able to determine what happens. But if it's sort of hidden behind this, well, whichever entity was created first, the player doesn't necessarily know when each entity got created, so they're not going to be able to know exactly how everything gets resolved, which is not a good thing. But, like, again, events have to be sent out in some order. And they have to be sent to entities in some order. I would just really rather have that information available to the player. I don't know that that's possible, though. I mean, like, I could have the entity itself store its, like, I could have it store the number of entities that got created prior to it. In other words, like an entity ID, almost. And then just say, okay, entities with a lower ID are going to have their effects happen first. and then I could just display the entity's ID to the player somehow, right? Like, say the player hovers over an enemy, and then it would display their entity ID, which is like maybe not super good to have something that technical in a video game that's not meant to be super technical like that. I just don't know how else I would convey the order in which stuff resolves to the player. I don't know. I don't think that there is a solution to this. Because again, the events have to be sent in some order, and the entities have to be sent to those events in some order. Yeah, it's kind of annoying. But I don't think that there's really a way around it. Yeah. I don't know. Unless I have to like redo the entire event thing. It just has to happen sequentially. And like maybe I can still make a resolver to give a little bit more control, but no, I mean, they're going to be making the components anyway. And by they, I mean me, but we're not there yet. It's kind of annoying. Okay. I don't know that there's a way around that. Okay, well. so I guess we'll just continue with the sending and receiving of events. So we've got the entity here that is capable of receiving events. Let's also define a function here. It says send. Let's actually make it in the dungeon first. So public void send value changed event. And this needs to take in a value value changed event. And then we'll just loop through all of the entities. Entities and say entity dot receive value changed event. Okay. And then value change request event. Value change request. Except this is going to need to return an enumerable modifiers. Make that lowercase. There we go. Okay, and then we want to do a very similar thing here. Except instead of component, we're doing entity, entities. Okay, cool. So then let's grab these, paste it in here, except these are going to be a lot simpler because all they need to do is say owner.send. Value changed. Owner.send value change request event. And give it the event here. So when we send an event, it's going to go up through this tree. It's going to go up through this tree all the way to the dungeon. And then when the dungeon receives it, it's going to send it all the way back down to all the components, or to all the entities, to all the entities components, to all the components effects, etc. So that's what we're doing. So when we send it, it goes up through the stack. When we receive it, it goes down. Or maybe through the tree is the better way of putting it. So let's go into component. And we'll should actually just be able to like copy paste this thing here. Yeah. So the exact same thing happens. We send it from the component to the entity. And then the only other thing is, do we need to add it to an effect? It's probably worth it to do that. Yeah, it's just the same thing here. Makes it a little bit easier for like an action to send events. Okay. I feel like that makes sense. Can we build? One succeeded. Okay, cool. Oof, man. This is not the easiest thing in the world. Okay. I feel like this is all right though. So now we can finally move on to a value provider. So this is going to effectively be state. Give me a new item. Value provider. Public. This is going to need a type. And it's going to need a component for the owner. Should I do a similar thing where instead of having a primary constructor, I have this kind of a constructor? But what? No, that's because that's not the same way that a value provider works. Yeah, so give me a component owner, and then give me a t value initial value. And then I'm also gonna need a resolution function. Get rid of this stuff. So I'm gonna need, let's actually put these on their own lines just to make it easier here. So I need a func. I need to get funky. If I do int, the last one is the result. So I needed to return a t value, and I needed to take in an enumerable of value change event modifiers. And we'll call it resolve value change request. Except we'll use lowercase because it's being passed in as a parameter. Okay, so now we need the value itself, which is going to equal initial value. We need the owner. Why did it do that? I don't know why it did that. And then we need this function. Maybe I should have just copied and pasted this whole thing. It's fine. Okay, equals that. Make this capital. Cool. Okay. So we need a function here that will return an action. And we'll say request value change. We'll take in another value, new value. Okay. Oops, I just scratched the mic, sorry. Okay, so because we don't actually have these events like filled out yet, they're just to-dos. Let's also do a to-do here. So construct a value change request event. Then what we want to do is actually send it. So let's actually grab these two functions again, and we can throw it in here for ease of use. So we can say send value change request event. Value change request event equals a new value change request event. Okay, so like obviously this is gonna have to be updated, but for now we'll just keep it this way. And then we can say value change request modifiers is equal to the result of that. And this resolution actually should take in the value we're trying to set it to, as well as the modifiers. Okay, so then we can say our resolved value equals resolve value change request. Let's just say resolve value. How should I name this? Resolve value change? Because we're no longer dealing with the request. We're just dealing with the thing we're trying to change it to and the modifiers. So maybe that's a good idea. So then we can say new value and the value change modifiers. So then I feel like I should rename this, right? Because they're not value change request modifiers, they're modifying the value change. Value change modifiers. Value change modifier. Okay, I'm gonna have to change that in a bunch of different places. Build me so I can see all the arrows here. Okay. Value change modifiers. Okay. Value change modifiers. Get value change modifiers. Okay. Okay, value change modifier. Oh, modifiers. Whoops. Okay. Oh, whoops. Value change modifier. There we go. Okay. Cool. Save all of that. Make field read only. Okay. So now let's say send value changed event is going to equal a lambda function here. And we'll say var value changed event equals a new value changed event. And then we'll throw this into here. Why is it giving me a squiggle? Oh, okay, I can do that. Yeah, sure. Okay, then I can say t value, or actually just value equals resolved value, and then return send value changed event. Okay, so the idea here is that we create the event, the request that we are requesting a value change, we send that event out and collect all of the modifiers that get changed. We apply the modifiers. Then we're going to create the value changed event, because the value, we already have what the new value should be. We create a function that will send out that event, but we don't actually send it out yet. We change the value, and then we return that function that will send out the event. That way, whenever something requests that a value be changed, the events don't immediately get sent out. Because again, the example that I used a while ago of like swapping two entities, there could potentially be an invalid state if we send out an event every single, like immediately after a value changes. So we want to give the caller the ability to send that event out. Use local function. Sure, whatever. I don't know that it makes a difference. But that's the idea here. That is the idea here. Field read only. Okay. And I think that's everything. I can make another function here just for ease of use, but we'll say Maybe I should rename this. Like change value. Change value. So the difference between these two would be this, basically. Let's have a... can make it protected, actually. We'll just have it return a t value and say request value change. And then it'll do all of this stuff. But it'll just say return. So then we can just say equals request value change new value. There we go. And then do the same thing over here. Okay. So change value. Like delayed event or like delay event. Something like that. Right, so the idea is that this function will change the value and then immediately send out the value changed event. Whereas this one will change the value, but it'll return a function that allows the caller to send the event. That way, if you've got more stuff that you want to do before you actually send the event out, you can do that. So this is like delay the event, right? I don't know that that's the best way to word that, but we're gonna assume that that's fine. And then we're saying that a component is the owner. And we did make this abstract. Did I make anything private here? No. Okay, cool. I'm wondering if it's worth it to have something like abstract class value provider, like without the return type on it. Component owner. Then I can just say, like, give me this line, throw it there. Then I can say this extends value provider. So we can get rid of that. Oh wait, we actually stop. And then we can say owner, right? Something like that. Then what we can do with that is we can say, okay, a component not only has a list of effects, but it also has a collection of value providers. Which we can just call state. And that can just be empty, right? And then do a similar thing here where we actually say value provider component owner, where owner equals owner, and then owner dot state dot add this. I mean, I don't think that's a really great way of going about this. I'm just thinking, like, maybe I should not make the component abstract, and then we can just sort of arbitrarily add state to it. Which feels weird. Like, I'd really like to not have this be abstract here. Like, what we could do is we could just leave it like this. And then have the user, aka me later, like, create stuff that could help manage state. No, I think it is a good idea to make this abstract, actually. Yeah, because there are other things that I want to do with this. So state. Yeah, this doesn't have to be like. No, stop. There. Okay. But if that's the case, I don't even need this, right? I can just undo all of that stuff. Don't need that anymore. Yeah, so then it's just being a collection of components, I think is okay. I'm fine with that. You know what? That doesn't need to be abstract. It doesn't need to be abstract. There's no reason for it to be. But I think the main idea is that I want the user, again, aka me, to extend a component to create their own components. I think that's okay. Okay. I mean, I think the only thing that's left to do is the to-dos, right? Right, I've got this exception for the condition. And then I actually have to like create these events. Oh, and the modifier. But I think the basic structure is there. I think it is. Then we just have the task of like creating the components and putting them together in a way that makes some sense. Okay. And then of course I should probably set up like a way to test all of this just to make sure that the way that I think it should be used actually works. But I think I'm gonna call it. I was not expecting there to be this much work today, or at least to get to this point, but I think some good decisions were made. I think I came face to face with some unfortunate realities about what I'm trying to do here, but I think overall, this is working. I think this is working. All right. But that's going to be it for the stream. I probably... Ooh, I just dropped my water. I probably am going to do something other than coding next stream. I am not going to stream tomorrow. Because I've got bowling. But... sorry, let me move this stuff around. So no stream tomorrow. Yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna be playing Willy Snail or potentially something else. I might start like an Undertale thing. We'll see. I know. What was the other game? So I think I'm ready to play Silk Song. I don't think there's anything else I need to do in Hollow Knight first. I thought there was one other game that I wanted to play. There's Hytale, but that's not out yet. Slay the Spire 2 is not out yet. I don't know. I don't remember. But that's going to be it for the stream. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate everybody being here. Hope to see you in the next one. But until then,